Welcome, it is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel as we try to build this thing up. Offseason has arrived. Packers going through staff decisions that are being made. Of course, the big one was the hiring of Jonathan Gannon to be the defensive coordinator after Jeff Hafley took the head coaching gig in Miami. Wanted to kind of pivot, at least for the next couple of weeks for the time being, unrestricted free agency, and specifically unrestricted free agents for the Packers. And I'm going to split it up into a few parts. Part one, in this video, we're going to talk about Malik Willis, Romeo Doubs. Part two, we'll probably pivot to the offensive line with Rasheed Walker and Sean Ryan, so on and so forth. And as kind of the days and the weeks carry along, I also do want to look at some roster decisions the Packers will have to make with players who are under contract in 2026 and maybe 2026 and beyond, because I think there's a couple of names. There could be some cap casualties for sure with players who are under contract with the Packers next year, but I don't think we'll be in a Green Bay Packers uniform. But for this video, this purpose, we start with two names, Romeo Doubs, Malik Willis. Both enter unrestricted free agency this offseason. And we'll start with Doubs, and like if we just want to call a spade, if you just want to wrap the video up here without getting any of the details, we could just say he's gone. Like Romeo Doubs, I would be shocked if he is in the green and gold in 2026 and beyond. Do I want him to be in the green and gold in 2026 and beyond? Yes. Do I see it as a realistic path for both the Packers and Romeo Doubs? No, I do not. You have to keep in mind Green Bay last April drafted Matthew Golden in round 1 and Savion Williams in round 3, both wide receivers out of Texas and TCU respectively. They did that with an eye ahead to what could be happening in this free agency in 2026, with an eye ahead of how the cap situation could come to be. And, of course, they hadn't even made the Micah Parsons trade at the time they drafted Matthew Golden and Savion Williams. But Green Bay, Brian Gutekunst, Russ Ball, and the rest of the brain trust for the Packers knew that in these next couple of years you have, at the time, before the draft last year, your top 4 wide receivers in Doubs, Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks, and Jaden Reed. In a 2-year stretch, all 4 could hit the market as unrestricted free agents. And they addressed that by going out and using a first and a third-round pick on Golden and Savion Williams. Now, there are questions and concerns. You can talk about the usage or the lack thereof with Matthew Golden. You can talk about the opportunities or their lack thereof that Savion Williams had in his rookie season. He dealt with injuries, especially in the second half of the year as well. I don't think there's any doubt that Green Bay has to and should want to use Matthew Golden a hell of a lot more in 2026 than what they did in 2025. That should be a point of emphasis for the offense. And so they go out and they draft 2 wide receivers, like I said, in the first and third round, when you already had Doubs, Watson, Wicks, and Reed in the fold. The Packers didn't draft Golden and Williams with the idea of, we need to push a lot of chips into the middle of the table for 2025. They need to be used a ton in 2025. It was with a peek ahead towards the future. Also keep in mind, Christian Watson, while rehabbing from a torn ACL, received a contract extension. Just a 1-year extension, and the Packers could revisit that in the coming weeks and months as the offseason really gets going. And perhaps they add on to that extension. That, again, was just a 1-year extension for Watson, but it keeps him in-house through at least the end of next season. But Watson has really emerged, in my opinion, as the number 1 wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers. Matt LaFleur won't phrase it that way. They don't ever talk about having a number 1 wide receiver. It's just, a collective group, and everyone eats, and we share the wealth, and whatever other phrase you want to use. But it is pretty clear that Christian Watson is the top dog in the wide receiver room for Green Bay. And when you have him and Doubs on expiring rookie deals, and before Christian Watson even returns from a torn ACL, now you have your fingers crossed that he'll be the same wide receiver he was before the injury. But the Packers didn't have, concrete knowledge of that, or concrete. Well, they had the confidence, but you just don't know how a player is going to recover, especially from an injury like a torn ACL, with someone like Watson, whose speed is one of his top traits, especially the top line speed, right? But they were still confident enough to give him the 1-year extension and not give Romeo Doubs an extension. That was the first sign where it was like, okay, we kind of have a little line drawn in the sand here that Green Bay is prioritizing Christian Watson over Romeo Doubs, which, again, is fine because I think Christian Watson is your number 1 wide receiver. But to give him the extension when he hadn't returned from that brutal injury suffered at the end of the season 2 years ago spoke volumes. And I love Romeo Doubs, as I said. I'd love to have him back. all those signs, starting with the Watson extension, point towards the idea and the reality that it's just not going to happen. You look at how things are taking shape for 2026 in the wide receiver room. It's all the names I mentioned: Watson, Reed, Wicks, Golden, and Williams. All under contract, all in the framework for 2026. That's 5 wide receivers right off the bat. 5. And you think about NFL roster construction and how it normally comes to be. Most teams in the regular season, when that final 53-man roster comes out at the end of the preseason going towards the regular season, you usually see 6, maybe 7 wide receivers on an active roster. The Packers already have 5 spots absolutely positively cemented in with Watson, Golden, Wicks, Reed, and Savion Williams. Now you have to, some people will be like, well, if Romeo Doubs is back, he's not number 6 out of that group of 6. Of course he's not even close. But Green Bay is now very well aware, or they better be, of their cap situation as well. And you look at Spotrac, and they have Romeo Doubs in his market value at $12 million per year. Spotrac, and I saw other outlets that put it between like 10 and 13, maybe 11 and 14, somewhere around there. There's a general consensus that Romeo Doubs' market value in free agency this offseason will net him a contract in the range of $12 million per year, and Spotrac has him getting somewhere around 4 years and $48 million. That is just not in the cards for the Green Bay Packers, and you have to consider market demand. Romeo Doubs, when you look at the free agent wide receivers in this class for this year, because that's all that matters right now, he is easily a top 5 wide receiver in this free agency class. George Pickens is the top dog. He's kind of in a tier all on his own, because George Pickens, I know he was with CeeDee Lamb in Dallas, but George Pickens showed that, hey, he can be a bona fide number 1 alpha wide receiver for a team. After George Pickens, because I put him in a tier by himself right now for this free agency wide receiver class, after him you have names like Doubs, Mike Evans, who's going to be 33 years old, Alec Pierce, and then there's, I would maybe lump those 3 together, Doubs, Evans, Pierce, in maybe that second tier. They're not similar in terms of trajectory, age, production, things of that nature, but in terms of this free agency class for wide receivers, I have Pickens, and then I probably would put Pierce, Evans, and Doubs, and then after that it's names like Rashid Shaheed, Wan'Dale Robinson, Juwan Jennings, more names like that are kind of cut from that cloth. But Romeo Doubs, make no mistake about it, is a top 5 wide receiver in this class. And if this were a free agency class that were loaded with multiple George Pickens type wide receivers, or there were multiple number 1 options on the market, maybe the market goes crazy on those first few names and Green Bay can sneak in and get Romeo Doubs back on a bit of a discount, but that isn't the case. That isn't how this free agency class is taking shape and how it's going to be. Outside of George Pickens and what you think of Mike Evans at this stage in his career, because I love me some Mike Evans, but this is not prime Mike Evans anymore, there is not a bona fide alpha number 1 wide receiver on the market. Outside of those 2, again, depending on what you think of Mike Evans at this stage in his career, George Pickens absolutely, most believe, would be a number 1 wide receiver. And outside of that, then it's names like Romeo Doubs and Pierce, Rashid Shaheed, Wan'Dale Robinson, Juwan Jennings, other names come in after that. So Romeo Doubs, the point being, like, Green Bay won't be getting in many, if any, bidding wars in free agency, and Romeo Doubs will be a top attraction for many wide receiver needy teams. It's all sort of coming to the pinnacle, and it's all coming to a point where it's Romeo Doubs is hitting free agency with the free agency class among wide receivers, where he will be a commodity for many teams. He will be courted by many teams. And the Packers, with how their cap situation, like Doubs is going in one direction where it's like, yeah, he should get maybe around $12 million, 4 for 48, and Green Bay's cap situation is at a point where it's like, it's not coming together, it's breaking apart. Like, it's just not going to work. It doesn't make financial sense. Green Bay can't really make it make financial sense. And for Doubs, it's an opportunity. He's entering the prime of his career. He's in the prime of his career. This is a chance for him to cash in, and he should absolutely, positively do that. And the Packers, like, wherever George Pickens ends up, and maybe it's just right back in Dallas, right? But wherever George Pickens ends up and that domino falls, then you're going to have teams pivoting towards an Evans, towards a Romeo Doubs if they're still available. And the Packers cannot get, they just can't. They can't afford to get into bidding wars, and it sucks. But Romeo Doubs said last week on the Up and Adams show with Kay Adams that he knows it's a business. He understands that. He made that very, very clear. And that's exactly what this case study with Romeo Doubs will be. It's a team in Green Bay that ideally would like to have Doubs back, but can't squeeze it into the budget and didn't prioritize it during the season, which is fine. Again, that's where it circles back to. It's all part of the business. Green Bay prioritized Christian Watson over Doubs. Completely fine, completely understandable. Many people see the logic and the reasoning behind that. Green Bay goes out. They draft Matthew Golden in the first round. They draft Savion Williams in round 3 because they know this is all coming to a point. And just like I believe Doubs won't be back with Green Bay this year, next year, if nothing is done with the contracts of Jade Reed and Dontavian Wicks, I would be shocked if both of them are back in the mix in 2027. But we can kick that can down the road for another year with those two because those two were in the draft class the year following Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs. And so it just comes down to, and it's kind of lame, it's kind of cheesy, but it's a business. Green Bay can't squeeze it into the budget. They didn't prioritize it during the season. They extended Watson, not Doubs, which is fine. The pros in keeping Romeo Doubs are like very obvious. Reliable target, great hands, pretty damn consistent. And an offense that spreads it around, he's pretty consistent. It's almost not worth talking about all the pros because I don't see it happening. Romeo Doubs will be playing elsewhere next year, and it's not something that Packer fans are like, oh yeah, Romeo Doubs is gone. It's like, shoot, that stinks. Would like to have Romeo Doubs in the picture. This is just the nature of the beast, the cost of doing business, if you will. Mitch, I'm on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Always, always, always appreciative of all the support. Over 1,000 subscribers, climbing towards 1,200, 1,500, 2,000. As we set our goals forward. And I'm very, very thankful and appreciative for the support. The second name I want to talk about in this video is Malik Willis. So we're checking names off. Packers unrestricted free agents. Stay or go, making the case. How realistic is it for Romeo Doubs? He's going to be playing elsewhere. If there's an even more obvious candidate than Romeo Doubs to be gone and be playing elsewhere and to cash in handsomely amongst the unrestricted free agents for Green Bay, it is Malik Willis. It is well-deserved. I'm looking around at the Packers unrestricted free agent class, and I see, Quay Walker, Sean Ryan, Rasheed Walker, Malik Willis, Romeo Doubs, Kingsley Enagbari. There's other names too. And it goes back to like that. Malik Willis came over via trade, but that draft class for Goody turned out pretty damn well. Like Rasheed Walker's been your starting left tackle since David Bakhtiari couldn't return, a couple years ago. And Rasheed Walker was a 7th-round pick. Quay Walker was a 1st-round pick, and he's been good. Would I say he's been, star-spangled awesome? No, he hasn't been like all-pro good, but Quay Walker's been good. Romeo Doubs was a 4th-round pick. That turned out to be great. Christian Watson, 2nd-round pick when he's on the field. Awesome. I just said I believe he's the number 1 wide receiver. Like that draft class for Goody a few years ago turned out to be pretty damn good. Willis came over via trade, and I'm wondering amongst this Packers unrestricted free agent class, is there any of them that helped their cause more this year than Malik Willis? Now, again, it was in, spot duty when Jordan Love was out of the lineup on a couple of occasions. But to me, the answer is nobody. Nobody helped their cause more than Malik Willis with the opportunities he had this year now entering free agency. He'll be 27 entering the 2026 season. And again, like I said with Romeo Doubs, when you talk about market demand, you have to look at supply and demand with Malik Willis when it comes to the quarterback position. The quarterbacks, folks, in this free agency class, the ones that could start somewhere next year, not like the 3rd stringer whose contract expired and maybe they'll try to get on a practice squad or maybe try to win a backup job somewhere amongst the 32 teams. The quarterbacks that have a chance at starting next year in this free agency class, and, Patrick Mahomes type quarterbacks, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, those guys aren't hitting free agency. The one good thing about the NFL is typically star quarterbacks will stay with the teams that selected them. And it's not like a big market chase. It's not like the NBA or Major League Baseball where all the top players are going to the Dodgers or all the top trade candidates in the NBA want to go to LA or Miami or Chicago or, something like that. Star quarterbacks, superstar quarterbacks typically stay in place. But you look at the free agent market quarterbacks this time around, it is Daniel Jones coming off a torn Achilles. I believe he's 29 or he will be 29. How does that look? You hope the best for Daniel Jones. He was having a great season in Indianapolis too. But 29 coming off a torn Achilles, I don't know. For someone who uses his legs, like he's a mobile quarterback. Is he trying to run 8-10 times a game? No. But he's a mobile quarterback who needs to use his legs. It's Daniel Jones. It's Malik Willis. And it's whatever Aaron Rodgers decides to do. Those are the quarterbacks. So you're like, okay, if you're a quarterback needy team, and we'll get to who the quarterback needy teams could be in a minute here, you're looking at free agency and you're like, Malik Willis, Daniel Jones, and who knows what's up with Aaron Rodgers. We probably won't know until pretty late along in the process during the offseason. So quarterback needy teams can be like, all right, let's pivot to the draft. Fernando Mendoza, probably the number one pick, right? He's probably going to be the number one overall pick. Outside of that, well, Dante Moore went back to Oregon. And Arch Manning, who many people were high on, didn't have the year he wanted at Texas. He's back at Texas. Lenore Sellers goes back instead of declaring for the draft. Goes back to South Carolina. Like a lot of these names that a year ago we were like, wow, this could be a really good quarterback draft class. Now it's like there's Fernando Mendoza and then who knows for April's draft, right? And so it lends credence to the idea that Malik Willis could be, when we talk about supply and demand, even more in demand, become even more of a prioritized piece of the puzzle for a quarterback needy team. Because I've said this a million times, so is damn near everyone else. You have to get the quarterback position right. If you don't really have a chance at the NFL. You just don't. It's just how it is. And so teams that need a quarterback will be like, well, what do we think of Dan Jones? Is he just going to go back to Indianapolis? What do we think of Malik Willis? What about Aaron Rodgers for a year? Or if he comes back, is he just going to reunite with Mike McCarthy, with Big Mike, and play for the Steelers one last season, one last time? Because you look around the draft prospects, and it's like, well, Dante Moore went back, Lenore Sellers went back. You have Fernando Mendoza, but he's probably going number one. After that, there's a lot of question marks. And even a guy like Mendoza, as good as he was at Indiana, and as awesome as a dude as he seems, is anyone circling him as like he is a can't-miss, absolute future superstar in this league? I don't think so. I don't think it's like a shoe. None of these prospects are shoo-ins to be that, but you feel pretty damn good about some quarterbacks in other years, right? Mendoza could end up being that, but we don't know. The draft class for quarterbacks looks pretty weak. It all just kind of comes back to Malik Willis is hitting free agency at the perfect time. There is zero case and zero reason, again, as much as this sucks, for him to return to be the backup quarterback in Green Bay and the backup to Jordan Love. Malik Willis has earned another shot to start somewhere. And when you look at quarterback-needy teams, it just so happens that Miami, who hired Jeff Havley, the Packers defensive coordinator, hired John Eric Sullivan, goes from Green Bay to Miami to be the general manager. They very much could be in the market for a quarterback, assuming they move on from Tua. All those stars could potentially align. Is Willis going to be a superstar? Kind of feels like a stretch, but could Malik Willis be a damn good starting quarterback in the right system with the right surroundings? Absolutely. Yes, he could. Spotrac has his market value set at $10 million. I would actually disagree with that. And again, I'm not, running a site like Spotrac, so they would probably have the better estimate than I. But when I look around at other recent quarterback contracts, and not big ones, not like, hey, what did, Dak Prescott and Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, those guys get. When I look at maybe someone in a similar situation, I'm not saying a similar quarterback to Malik Willis, but maybe similar quarterback, similar situation. Spotrac has the market value set at $10 million, and they also have it as like a 1-year, $10 million contract. I could see Malik Willis, given supply and demand, the amount of quarterback-needy teams, and the amount of quarterbacks that will be available via the draft that you trust and free agency, I could see Malik Willis fetching more. And I could see it being more than a 1-year deal. Maybe it's Miami on a 2-3-year deal. And I look at someone like Justin Fields, who signed a 2. Now, do the Jets usually make great decisions? No. But Justin Fields did sign a 2-year, $40 million with $30 million guaranteed deal last offseason with the New York Jets. Did it work out? No, it blew up in their face. He didn't even finish the year as the starting quarterback. If the Jets can give Justin Fields a 2 for $40 with $30 million guaranteed, why can't Malik Willis get more than a 1-year deal worth $10 million? And I get Justin Fields had a longer sample size as a starting quarterback. I just see Malik Willis getting more on the market. And you ask, what teams need a quarterback? Raiders, Mendoza. Jets, who tried out the Justin Fields experiment, and it did not work. Cardinals, assuming Kyler Murray is gone and everything points towards Kyler Murray being gone. I'll be honest, I think Arizona's in just kind of a really, really bad spot, and it kind of starts up top. For Malik Willis's sake, I hope he doesn't end up in Arizona with the Cardinals. I just see that being a long, drawn-out rebuild. And, at the time of recording this video, they don't even have a head coach, and a lot of the top candidates weren't even interested in the Arizona job. Speaks for itself. Dolphins, already mentioned it. Jeff Hafley, John Eric Sullivan, that makes sense, and we assume Tua will be gone. The Colts, are they just going to bring back Daniel Jones? What do they do? The Browns, do they like Shedeur Sanders? Do they like Dylan Gabriel? Or do they maybe get in the Malik Willis sweepstakes potentially at quarterback? Vikings, do they trust J.J. McCarthy, or would they bring in a Malik Willis? I would tend to believe they'd stick it out with J.J. McCarthy more than going with someone like Willis if they did like a one-year thing. I hate saying it. I'm going to wash my mouth out with soap, but could the Vikings be interested in Aaron Rodgers? And then the team he just played for, the Steelers, what are they going to do at quarterback? Mike McCarthy taking over. Does Rodgers come back for another year? Do they like Will Howard enough to hand the keys to the car over to him? Or could they be intrigued by an option like Malik Willis? We know they tried out the Russell Wilson, the Justin Fields sweepstakes a couple years ago, and neither of those options worked out. So there's a good market of teams that need a starting quarterback, that will want a starting quarterback, but the supply is pretty thin, which helps Malik Willis and his case to cash in even more. So I'm starting this series. Unrestricted free agents for the Packers, stay or go. How likely is it? What the market demand could be? And to me, Romeo Doubs and Malik Willis are both gone, and it sucks. But hopefully, as a Packers fan, you can be happy for Malik Willis. Like, he's done his part as the backup quarterback, stepped in and stepped up when Jordan Love was out the last couple of years. Like, he deserves to cash in. Romeo Doubs, I think most would love to fit him into this picture, but the signs were there with drafting a wide receiver in the first and third round, and then Christian Watson, who also was on the same timeline as far as an expiring rookie deal, got the extension before he returned from a torn ACL, while Doubs did not. So the signs, the writing on the wall, kind of there for Green Bay. Let me know what you guys and gals think. I'm always appreciative of all the support. It is Mitch M on YouTube. We'll see you next time.